الزول في الأول نسيو سيانا دوغالا تمثال لوكران دوين يضعون ذيك السكين لقينا بروفيسور انت سداوي ثما سداوان دي سداوي ثن اوطاوا يخدمن دك اجزو توسنا تمتسي نا فاكولتي اوف ساينس او سوشيال ساينسز ات يونيفرسيتي اوف اوتاوا يخدم ذكوين يشدن غاف الزناوين تسرثيثنا بوليتيكال ستاديز وكاين الدكتور ايفان كاتشانوفسكي يخدم لنا نادي ناس يكون يشدن غافين من غانيك تيلينا كذا مظلة غاوين يشدن غنثموثي سانسليت لوكران اكن يتمسيد غاف سانسيتي ضغون لك هذه الامريكان تموت كي اذن تيدير لكندا ثان كوفريديس يسوجد ثلاثة يدليس نا ديفرون امزوارو ديك السن يسمى The Russia Ukraine War and its Origins. We've seen the Maidan massacre in Ukraine and Gero modern Ukraine. Senior et Dr. Ivan Katchanovski, Zulfilek. Good morning. Hi, Doctor.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
I just summarized in Kabyle language what you've done and what are the topics of research you are dealing with at the University of Ottawa. My first question, could you please summarize your research topics for us? Mas Dr. Ivan Katchanovski, that's my question. Could you please summarize your research topics, Doctor?
Yes, thank you. Again, I specialize in research in conflicts and politics in Ukraine for more than 20 years since I wrote my PhD dissertation in the United States at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. area on regional political divisions and conflicts in Ukraine and Moldova. So I published this dissertation as a book in Germany in academic press, and afterwards I specialized in researching all major conflicts in Ukraine, including contemporary conflicts like Maidan massacre, war in Donbass, annexation of Crimea, and the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. And I also research historical conflicts, recent historical conflicts like massacres during World War II and Stalin's great terror in Ukraine. So this is my main area of research for a very long time. And I published already 4 books, and I have 3 books which would be published very soon this year and at the beginning of next year. And 1 book would be about origins of this war in Ukraine, going back to Maidan and the current war and all other conflicts taking place in Ukraine, like war in Donbass and annexation of Crimea. And another book would be about Maidan massacre in Ukraine. So I have also publications in more than 20 articles in peer-reviewed journals and many book chapters. So this is my main area of research, and I can say that I'm originally from Ukraine, so I can do research in Ukrainian and Russian language, which is, I think, very important advantage and asset compared to many other people who now moved to researching this conflict, because it is very important to look into primary sources which are not often available, and just very few political scientists in the world are able to do research in Ukrainian and Russian simultaneously, because they most of researchers just do not speak languages, so they are not able to research a lot of documents, a lot of sources, which are, I think, main basis for my research, like for instance for Maidan massacre and for the war in Donbass and the current war between Russia and Ukraine. So I think this is just my academic background, but I also did research about other issues. Like, for instance, I published a book about labor unions in Canada and the United States as a part of my research when I was a research assistant for Simon Martin Lipset, who was one of the leading political scientists in the world and specialized in Canadian and American politics.
كان سلامد إيفان كاتشانوفسكي ماشي ذا نقاد نسوقولي دينا هذا كنتي دينا تزوغان نتسا إلا زوغانيس لوكران يوغان شي نسكوسن ذا نادي غافين يكون شدنا غاف نوثيس لوكران ذو من نوع كي ضغونا كالا دغا دي ثالثة ناد ذاك نيوغا إذ لسنيا كان مشان يسوجل كيف الدنيا إذ لسنا ديفرون دي نير دي تدونا ديفرون تاني الدنيا the Russia-Ukraine war and its origins the Maidan massacre in Ukraine and the modern Ukraine in لكن داغن يتنادي غافين يشد نيوك كندا ذا امريكان إن دانيين يوغا نطاس يما كيغاز نوسنانن دي زارتيكل سيونتيفيك ماشي ديال ناسين نطاس بطروح ما مسمل إنس دي بالنسبة تزاويت من أوتاوا تفنك في الشيء يتنادي يونيفرس دي تزاويت كاين أوتاوا شي كاريون ساسكسيوي سينا دكتور كاتشانوفسكي ذا كان كيكتوران زرين سينيس كواسن ومقارونا طغادا كيقلان دي لوكران او يفنا ديني دا شو اللي حالاهم منو غا كيقلانا طغادا كيقلان دينا او يفنا دا ديني دا شو تمغولي ناس شو كيضحكونا كاري ميدياثون للكندا غافين يشدن ياك طغادا كي هاثي لا وين يفرنو في تقارنا دكتور كاتشانوفسكي ديني basically what I said in Kabyle language Dr. Katchanovski, the war in Ukraine has just completed its second year. We would like to have an idea of what is the summary of the state of play of this war. The second aspect of my question is about the Canadian media. Are they outletting or providing us all the necessary news about this war, Ukraine, Russia, or maybe something is missing? That's my question, Doctor.
Yes, thank you. And I think I researched this war in very detail. I follow each day major developments, looking into hundreds of videos and reports in different languages, different sources, including major Telegram channels, which is a collection of primary data. And based on my research, which also will be published soon as a book, I can say that currently the war in Ukraine has very devastating effect on Ukraine. And Ukraine already lost about 20% of its territory, including annexed Crimea, which was again conflict in 2014, but also Ukraine basically de facto lost and control over Donbass region, with some territories of Donbass, Oblast of Donbass region still under kind of control of Ukrainian government, but this is a main area of fighting right now, and Russia slowly moving into taking control over other remaining parts of Donbass from Ukrainian government control forces, from Ukrainian government and from Ukrainian forces. And currently, I think it's very difficult to say that Ukraine would be able to defeat Russia, because Russia has a military advantage in Ukraine in terms of manpower. It has much bigger size of population, and now after mobilization, Russia was able to increase their military ranks very significantly, in contrast to Ukraine, which struggles with mobilization, because now a lot of Ukrainians just do not want to fight. There are like hundreds and thousands of videos which show that Ukrainian men are taken by force, basically, and put into vehicles and then driven for military service to frontline without much training. And I think this is a very revealing situation now, in contrast to the start of the war, when many Ukrainians volunteered to join Ukrainian forces, and they believe that they would be able to defeat Russia. But Russia has also advantage in terms of artillery. It's able to use also missiles, long-range missiles, which recently hit very important energy infrastructure objects, like one of the largest underground gas deposits or natural gas deposits in Western Ukraine, and Russian missiles and drones from Iran actually hit also and damaged very heavily major electric stations in Ukraine, electric power generating stations in Ukraine, and this has also major negative effect on Ukraine, not only in terms of military effort, but also in terms of economic effect. And Russia has also advantage in other aspects of like Air Force, which also now they use to hit Ukrainian forces with guided bombs. And so in this case now this war is often presented by Western media, basically that Russia, especially at the start of this war, that basically Russia is weak, it will not be able to defeat Ukraine. Ukraine is going to win this war. Ukraine will be able to take back control over Donbass and Crimea. And but this is quite I think was quite amazing just to watch this on the media, because this is contrary to all the evidence, contrary to all basic balance of power. But I think this was just part of propaganda, and media just repeated all this propaganda just to kind of which was promoted by the governments in Ukraine and also in the West, because this was needed to kind of advance their own interests, and this is actually contrary to interests of Ukrainians in Ukraine, because Ukraine would not be able to defeat Russia by military force, and this is was very clear from the start of this conflict. So the longer war continues now, the more difficult for Ukraine would be in terms of military losses, which are now very significant. My estimate, based on research on different sources, that now in Ukraine lost about 100,000 military members and other armed formations members killed, and about 400,000 wounded. So this is, I think, very significant losses, and Ukraine now struggles with mobilization of new personnel to try to kind of replenish military ranks, and it also lacks ammunition and artillery, because now Ukrainian forces rely on support from the Western government, Western military supplies and economic support, like state budget, almost entirely financed by Western countries in terms of, with exception of military spendings, which are by kind of by agreement, just financed by Ukrainian government. So in this case, I think media does not offer a very good and reliable representation of this war. And from the start of this conflict, I think was very clear. And in particular, in addition to what I mentioned, just talking that Ukraine would be able to defeat Russia, which was not based on reality. Also, Canadian and other major Western media omitted background of this conflict, which so they said that this war was unprovoked. This just started with the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, but actually conflict has much bigger, much longer background, which goes back to the Maidan massacre, and also NATO expansion and admission of Ukraine, kind of promise by NATO to admit Ukraine as NATO member, even so there was no such real possibility, and also annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, which are actually conflicts which led to escalation of this war and illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. And in addition, another issue which is omitted by the media, Western media, including Canadian media, is that there was almost a peace deal which was very close to agreement in 2022, in just actually 2 years ago. At this time, at the end of March, there was negotiations in Istanbul, in Turkey, with involvement of intermediaries like from Israeli Prime Minister and former Chancellor of Germany and Turkish officials. So there was a real possibility of peaceful end to this war, peaceful resolution of this conflict, but it was blocked by the Western countries, specifically by Boris Johnson, who was sent to Kiev to tell Zelensky to continue this war. And the policy of the West became basically to use Ukraine to try to weaken Russia, even so there is no real possibility of defeating Russia. But I think this that's why I'm quite pessimistic about the outcome of this war, and about this war in general, from a Ukrainian perspective and also from Western perspective, because there is kind of basically there is no real chance to kind of achieve the goal which were kind of dominated by the media, were just promoted by the media as a real possibility that Russia would be defeated and that Ukraine would win and become a member of NATO and so on. This is just wishful thinking.
كان ماشي ديال تنتعرف دي سهم دكتور كاتشانوفسكي إن يكون زميران فهمت زغنت كي كضغونا كان دي لوكران بلا ما نروح كان فين غا مزرو إلا غاد يولاني تاتشيناويت سمان لا ريفولوسيون دو دينيتي زوج على 14 دي ميدان كيت سمكير ديونا كني نتسقها تنفرحان نكور مفرط دي كييف يعني بما نروح يبقى نيجي ثان نمثاوان نمينسك زعما اللي حاله يدكاكا إثلا ثورة غاسقسي ودي تدون بغات شدا وكني غاتيلي غادا مزغويين كوني سي قباليين سي جزائريين سي مازال نسوما تمثيل يعني كيضرون كادي موثقين لوكران تمسات يشدنا غار ثوث لايث شكون وغالغا من يغدا كان تي كيو 5 هاف ذا ميديا او حيد اللي تمسكينا في مساتكين خاطر عطات تيدا تدرنا باللي نفز غنتكين يا لوكران دانوس شو دانيا ثوث لايث شكي ذا سكسيو سكسير اي دكتور Katchanovski senior how important doctor is the linguistic divide in Ukraine.
There is significant linguistic divide in Ukraine between Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers, and Ukrainian speakers mostly live and dominate western regions of Ukraine, which is I'm from western part of Ukraine, so I'm native Ukrainian speaker, and also Ukrainian speakers dominate central Ukraine, including capital of Ukraine, Kyiv city. But Russian speakers dominate eastern Ukraine, including Donbass, which is now a major area of fighting taking place, and also
Besides, sorry, Dr. Ivan Katchanovski, besides those two main languages, the Ukraine, which is, if I understood very well, it's a mix up between the Polish and the Russian language, and for the Eastern, it's Russophone, Russophiles, all they speak all. Is there any other third language spoken in the Ukraine? That's a curiosity for me. Is there any other languages besides those two?
no, I think only basic main languages are Russian and Ukrainian.
Okay.
There are small other minorities living, like Polish minority, and Hungarian minority in the west, but they are relatively small. And Crimea, there are Crimean Tatars in Crimea, but again, they are not a majority of population because Crimea is dominated by Russia, including South. But I think a linguistic issue is much more, I think, how to say, is very different politically, because main division in Ukraine is not just based on language, it's based on history, historical divisions. And I published my book about these divisions going back to history. And I call this cleft countries because Ukraine was divided along different cultural, basically political cultures, different values, going back to history when western part of Ukraine was part of Poland and Romania, Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and eastern part of Ukraine and many other regions were part of the Russian Empire and then part of the Soviet Union for a long time, in contrast to Western Ukraine, which only became part of Soviet Ukraine after as a result of World War II. And Crimea was under control of Ottoman Empire. So in terms of historical differences, I think historical differences are much more important, and also ethnic differences are very significant because most Russian speakers in Ukraine are not Russians. They are not ethnic Russians. They are Ukrainians who just basically who speak Russian as their main language. Even so, often their Ukrainian is their native language, but they spoke Russian as main language. And but they are ethnically Ukrainian in contrast to majority of ethnic Russian population in Crimea and almost half of ethnic Russian population in Donbass.
كايدينا دكتور إيفان كاتشانوفسكي إنك تصيدت تمثال نافذ غنتو ثلاث لا جارتي سباوات كي دي بوني كوش كذا غنا كذا ذم جارو جار لوكران ذنوس شاكين بود تصم سلايف اللاس لدغا أكد البروفيسور رشيد بن حدادين دوالام ذا شحال انتكال ويفانا الدوغالا كي فين دينا دوك سقسيني يزرين غتشوفو تسوق ملي غطانت ولا ما طاس يدي هضر غيعدينا مولاش الوقت وكنا نسام كل شيء دينا يمسلايد غير فين كي دي دغان 2014 زعما ديني وينا كاين خانس فرانسيس تاع تورنو هيستوريك دوك مزوري كيكير نا دوك مزون منو غير لوكران اكذا روس دي تقاني مقارن على كوم قان ميدان دي كان ديكيا 2014 تضغط تقول قارنا ثانيا تشيناويت نا ريفولوشن اوف ديغنيتي ذاك نسجيميرن استخرن كيكير أسلوي جلان يميرن فيكتور يانوكوفيتش جلان سلواي يميرن خاطر يما لانوس خاطر وقفليس سكوسميت فيغا كانت تيجدو ذاك اوكرين ما كاين ديك زمرنوس ذي شقيقان يا في سلواني ثلا مال ناموس المي خاطر قوى دينا لا كوربسيون تاسيغلان جانت سوفرانت تيغولاني ديلان دي فوغا 2014 دا غاتينا يتباغي دبوين موسى مي بوين ثم كيما قال لا كريمي ذي مغرس سكون 2014 غا امريكان مكني كان يكفان وران الاولمبيك سوشي ديال نشتوا ذي روس غا ايروسين طفن لا كريمي دا شكي كو ديسكسين از مارتي دينير اي ماس بروفيسور Katchanovski to understand his work. We need to know what has happened at Maidan in 2014. It turns out that you worked on these events of 2014, and even more than that, you are an academic scholar who considers facts and not ideology. My question for you, Doctor, could you please give us a summary of these 2014 events and what is the importance, especially that the February 2014 revolution that we call of dignity that ousted Ukraine President Viktor Yanukovych as which is seen at that time as the trigger for Russia to invade Crimea in March 2014. That's my question.
Thank you. I think this is also a very important issue, and I researched this, and I'm now finishing writing my book. So I published already 3 peer-reviewed journal articles about this Maidan events, specifically about Maidan massacre. And I can say, actually, this is one of the most misrepresented issues in Ukraine in terms of conflicts and politics in Ukraine. And even the name, Revolution of Dignity, actually very interesting origins of this name, which goes back to a party which was called Svoboda, which is far-right party, which was originally a neo-Nazi party, openly neo-Nazi party, which used name Social National Party, which uses symbols, neo-Nazi symbols. So, and this party basically joined Maidan protest, which started in the end of November 2013, after a decision by Yanukovych, then president of Ukraine, to suspend signing of agreement between Ukraine and European Union for free trade and association of Ukraine between European Union and Ukraine. And afterwards, because he suspended this agreement, there was a protest in Ukraine, which was started as a relatively small protest, but it grew to a very big protest, which turned not only against his decision by Yanukovych to suspend this agreement with the European Union, but also became anti-Yanukovych protest with goal of his overthrow. And this protest was initially a peaceful protest, mostly peaceful protest, but it turned into violent protest. There was a major beating of students, of protesters, small number of protesters on November 30th, but it was misrepresented as again as just unprovoked beating and unprovoked violence by the police. But then there was a presence of far-right already elements during this protest from very start. And far-right elements, even so they were in parties like Svoboda and right sector, they were small in terms of representation among Maidan protesters, but they were very active in violence. So they participated in this original fight with police on November 30th, but this was totally omitted by the media. So, and media only showed violence by the police. So a lot of Ukrainians joined this protest against Yanukovych because they believe what the media were telling them, and they supported kind of membership of Ukraine in the European Union, even so there was no such possibility in this agreement, which was negotiated between Ukraine and European Union. But they actually believe, again, because this was what they were told by opposition and by Ukrainian politicians and by media in Ukraine. And this peaceful protest did not lead to overthrow of Yanukovych government. So it basically was failing to achieve such a goal. And because of this, actually, based on my research, I can say that violence started And this started with involvement of Maidan opposition, including far-right elements like Svoboda and right sector. And Svoboda deputy actually was the one who coined the term or proposed the term revolution of dignity, which now again became a very popular term and used to represent these events. But actually, according to my research, this was not just a kind of revolution. This was actually a combination of mass protest against Yanukovych, which was against mass protest, but it was not successful in changing the government. And it was combination also of of a coup against Yanukovych, specifically by means of Maidan massacre and assassination attempts against Yanukovych, which led him to flee Ukraine. And also, this was United States-led regime change in Ukraine because of involvement of the United States in overthrow of Yanukovych government. So based on my research, I can say that Maidan massacre, which took place on February 18, February 20th, in 2014, was conducted not by Yanukovych government forces on his order, as was universally reported by the media in the West and in Ukraine, but actually it was conducted and organized by elements of the Maidan opposition, including oligarchic parties like Fatherland and also far-right parties like Svoboda and the right sector. And evidence is just overwhelming. I analyze testimonies. There are like hundreds of eyewitness testimonies about sniper shooting Maidan protesters from Hotel Ukraina, which was controlled by the opposition, specifically by far-right Svoboda. There are testimonies of absolute majority of wounded Maidan protesters who testified for the Maidan massacre trial investigation that they were shot by snipers, not from the government location like Berkut police, government snipers, but they were shot by snipers who were located in Maidan control buildings like Hotel Ukraina and other locations. And there are even ballistic examinations by ballistic experts. There are like videos which show snipers located in Hotel Ukraina and that they were from far-right link organization and company and that they were shooting from Hotel Ukraina, that this hotel was controlled by far-right Svoboda, which officially stated that they took this hotel under their control before Maidan massacre. So this is, I think, evidence is just beyond any dispute that this was false. Kind of based on my research, I can say this was false flag massacre, specifically with the aim to overthrow Yanukovych government and blame him for this mass murder of the Maidan protesters. And this massacre started with mass killing of police, and led kind of and again ended with mass murder of Maidan protesters. And recently, there was a court decision in Ukraine. For a very long time, there was Maidan massacre trial, which I studied very closely. And this trial decision, again, was reported in the media in the West only in terms of conviction of Berkut members. Three Berkut members were convicted in absentia for murder of Maidan protesters, but based on the actual text of the verdict. This decision by the court, Ukrainian court, stated that there were, again, what I stated in my research, that there were shooters and snipers located in Hotel Ukraina, and that this hotel was controlled by Maidan opposition, specifically that there was far-right link group of snipers in this hotel, that they were shooting from this hotel, that many protesters were killed and wounded from this hotel, and that there was no order from Yanukovych government or Yanukovych or his ministers or his commanders to massacre Maidan protesters by the police or by government snipers, and there was also no evidence of any involvement of Russian snipers in this massacre. So this is, I think, this is just major revelations confirming my research. But again, no major media reported this. But I recently had an interview with one very prominent Western media journalist who said that he would be writing an article based on my research and would try to publish this article in one of the leading Western media outlets in the world, because he convinced based on my research that this massacre kind of basically was misrepresented by Western media, and he agrees with finding of my research. So I hope it will be published soon. But again, media is often not just based on evidence. They also kind of try to promote narrative, even so this is false narrative, like in this case.
Thank you, Dr. Katchanovski. شدينا ذاك دي تزوغينس تجاولاني نيسا ريفوليوشن اوف ديغنيتي دي دغان 2014 دي تزقانا دي لاكور ميدان دي تزوغات ثلاثة غيمثنا دي سيفيل ودعم ثلاث تلويث وديال لي سواش مع المثاث مشات تغال في النقلاف تغال زيادة تيس المثاث ثغا نوح سات السينيظن تشد ديما في ذياني نكير ميدان إدغان ذاكن من بعد ذاك فغنتيد ذاك اوكرانيا بغان تقنني منسل نكيكير يوروبيان يونيون إوا كنا اوكرانيين الناس هاث مثل السوات كسن كي سلوينين كي تدني يعني كوفيتش شو دنرنوس دني سبا انت كوربسيون ما يتاخر ما شو دنوس نتقنني ما سما ثوروف سما اثمورا نومالو لوكسيدون هذا شكين ايس نقصن دي مزالكين تجعل ماشي ذاني دلان بغازغا ثمغلي انه نفكي كينا ومينير دكتور إيفان كاتشانوفسكي in addition of demanding for closer European Union relations, Ukrainians took to the streets to denounce the country's endemic corruption from the grand corruption practiced by ex-President Yanukovych and his peers to everyday corruption and petty unfairness. My question, how much progress now did the successive Ukrainian governments to fight the corruption?
Yes, this was a real issue, and Yanukovych government was corrupt and also linked to oligarchs like Rinat Akhmetov and many other oligarchs who supported then Yanukovych party, but they actually turned against Yanukovych when his family members tried to kind of and friends and so-called personal network of Yanukovych tried to basically take their assets and businesses and so on. So they started to support Maidan opposition. But after Maidan events, this actually did not eliminate corruption. There is still very significant corruption, grand corruption in Ukraine by the government officials, but also at the local level. So corruption still remains. And it was a major issue also during Poroshenko government before Zelensky was elected. And even Zelensky, when he was elected, there were also revelations in Western media, for instance, that he also got a lot of money, like millions of dollars from another oligarch who was very powerful oligarch called Igor Kolomoisky, who supported Zelensky and his elections by giving him basically free coverage, very positive coverage on a very popular Ukrainian television channel, which was owned by Kolomoisky. And Kolomoisky was also a very corrupt oligarch, and he had built his wealth by using connection to power. And so Zelensky basically kind of was considered to be a kind of a creature of Kolomoisky, and Kolomoisky tried to support the election of Zelensky just to increase his wealth and specifically to retain control over some banks, like a bank which was a very large bank, which was kind of taken back from Poroshenko by from Kolomoisky by Poroshenko. But after Zelensky was elected, corruption still remains an issue, but now Zelensky basically kind of tried to cut Kolomoisky, his patron, who helped him to get elected, and now Kolomoisky is in prison for basically corruption and for other crimes, and he also investigated in the United States. But Zelensky pretends that again there is no corruption now, and for political reasons, I think media also started not to report about corruption. Even so, I think that there is also a variety of evidence that there is still a very significant corruption taking place, including with foreign aid. And but I think a lot of this information would be made public only after Zelensky will no longer be president of Ukraine, as very often happens, because now basically Zelensky controls Ukrainian media, so there is no real opposition in Ukraine. So I think it's very difficult, and for political reasons, Western media is also very reluctant to report anything critical of Zelensky. So I think it's very difficult to get all this kind of information now about specific cases of corruption, but I can say, based on a variety of sources, that this is still a very significant issue in Ukraine, including at the very top of Ukrainian government.
تنمية دكتور إيفان يسمد ذاك سيدة نيكا صغلير نسلويني إدنا يانوكوفيتش ماشي ذاني ديو غير شوية ديو سنة غاسو لما مالا كيكير غاث مورانو ما يمكن هذيك تيجعل كير يسمد دني لكن أنا كي غالو أوليغارشي يبغى دينين داكن ثنباط على جوفرنس مثلي غير فاس كان اللعيبات كان يمون خالق كلاس دومينونت وداني ديوسان سيرموس مكني تضاد حريشان دي شقفان جند لاثور دي ويكاديك تفن ثموث اليوكران ويكاديك في جلان زيك تي يدي شق يدي ديوسان سيروس شكينا هاث الشد غاسق سياكي غافوس لوايا كنتوها يكلانكا اسلواي زيلينسكي كان في كيسن كيكي لا هذا مزداغ نو سامر يقلانا كيكي هضرن ثاروسيث لكن هذه بنو ثقن ثياب جارسون يوكني ماما هذه سانكيز لي بونسيون لي روتريت تنسن لا دغا ثناطني دونباس يقلان سامر كي تمسلاين كيكي ستوغث ثاروسيث كيزغام فلاكي كي يعني فسنا ود ناقشو دني منسن نوز سقسينا اديني وسنا هات ميلا سلواي سيلينسكي يطفط بوا سي وكنيا اسني دي الفغير امزداقا كي انه سامر لوكراين دكتور ايفان بريزيدنت زيلينسكي was elected in 2019 and the Russian speakers in the East voted for him overwhelmingly. He had President Zelensky promised to restore bridges, even paying the pensions of retirees from Donbass. My question is, did he keep his promises to Eastern Ukraine?
Yes, Zelensky was elected on such election promises, and he received most of his support in eastern and southern Ukraine, which is mostly Russian-speaking Ukraine. And Zelensky was originally also from Kryvyi Rih city, which is basically located in southern or eastern Ukraine, depending on how this region would be classified in Dnipropetrovsk region. And Zelensky was himself a Russian speaker. He did not even speak fluent Ukrainian when he was running for his election as a president of Ukraine. So he was Russian speaking kind of from birth, and so a lot of people supported his election for this reason. But actually, after he came to power, he totally changed on this issue. So he became what I call Poroshenko on steroids. So he became even more nationalistic compared to Poroshenko, who also was oligarch and who also promised to end the war and support all kind of peaceful resolution of conflict. But Poroshenko turned into a very nationalistic politician, and Zelensky ran on opposition to Poroshenko. But after Zelensky was elected, very soon Zelensky became even worse than Poroshenko in this regard. He totally forgot his promises of a peaceful resolution of the war in Ukraine and promising again giving greater rights to Russian speakers in Ukraine, and so he became very nationalistic in his policy, basically turning into kind of politician who became very opportunistic. And the reason for this is because there was a pressure from far right. So far right, like a right sector leader, specifically said publicly that if Zelensky would fulfill his promises and would try to resolve conflict peacefully in Ukraine, or to fulfill other promises for which he was elected, he would be basically kind of hung on the main street of Kiev. So basically, he would be killed kind of for his decision. And so there were similar sides from far right who even attack his office of president of Zelensky, again threatening him not to sign any peaceful deal with Russia and to end the war in Donbass, which was a region which was not only Russian-speaking region, but also I think kind of half of population in Donbass was ethnically Russian population. So in this case, Zelensky kind of became basically president who I think I call this a very weak president because he was not able to resist pressure from far right. But there was also very significant pressure from the West, because specifically from the United States, because Ukraine after Maidan, Ukraine became I call this client state of the United States, because the United States government played a very significant role in the removal of Yanukovych, and Obama even admitted this, that there was U.S. involvement in overthrow of Yanukovych, specifically vote in parliament to remove Yanukovych. And United States government had a very strong involvement in selection of top leaders of Ukraine, like Prime Minister of Ukraine Yatsenyuk, and even heads of security service of Ukraine and other top ministers of Ukraine and Prosecutor General Office head of Ukraine. And Biden admitted this. And Biden, when he was Vice President of United States, he was responsible for Ukraine, and so he was involved in basically managing Ukraine as a client state of the United States. So when Zelensky came to power, he basically again accepted a client status of Ukraine vis-a-vis United States, and so for this reason he also changed his election promises and tries to fulfill promises which are the policies which are again contrary to what is in Ukraine, but supported by the United States. And I think this also has a manifestation in the current war in Ukraine, which has now become also proxy war between Western and Russia in Ukraine, in addition of being also war between Russia and Ukraine, and also still to a significant extent war between the civil war in Ukraine in Donbass between pro-Russian separatists in Donbass and other Ukrainian forces or central government forces impeding far right.
دكتور كاتشانوفسكي إنك إذا كان ماشي كان السلواي السلواي سيلينسكي الطفا كان بواليس بوانيا كدينا لي بروماس كاين خالص فرانسيس لدغا امزدار نو سامع تمسلان تاروسيس ماشا ايفان دي سيار زات كنيا في كاين لكن دا سلواي خالص كليزيتي نياس ويك يفابل ويضعف طاس طاس وسعينا يبان إذا كان يتدو كان دي البغير نتموغا نو مالو لدغا الامريكان إثيران يخدم الكيرا كيكير كان خاص كليزيت بروكسي كونفيغراسيون من نتموغا كين نو مالو ناتو لوطون هذا شي كذا سكسيرا ديال الانيسيا غازات ماشا قبل وان شاكير ويفانا سكسيرا فين يشدن امثاونا المينسك ناض مينسك اجريمنت امثاونا كاين ميسك غلين وكاينك اذا كان نتا زيلينسكي كاين يسعى نتاكي سبات مزوغوش شميع وبوذنا وطفنا الجوال المثاوى كيلان يارس أكثر لوكران دكتور Katchanovski. My next question is about the Minsk agreements, which have called for the decentralization of the Ukraine by providing more powers to the regions, the blasts, as they call them in Ukraine, basically Donbass. Is allowing Ukraine to regain control of the eastern border with Russia, but President Putin had blamed President Zelensky for the Minsk Accord failure. My question is, did Zelensky attempted to do this part in implementing the Minsk Accords? That's my question.
Yes, I think Zelensky was initially elected on the promise of a peaceful resolution of this war in Donbass, which was civil war, which started after Maidan massacre and overthrow of Yanukovych in 2014. And Russia was involved in this civil war by supporting pro-Russian separatists in Donbass. And Russia even directly participated in this war by sending their military forces covertly in August of 2014 and then in winter 2015. And as a result of this direct Russian military interventions, Ukrainian government had to sign Minsk agreements because basically under kind of Russian military pressure. And in these agreements, again, there was a possibility of resolving this conflict peacefully, but Zelensky did not fulfill these agreements, and he admitted this actually after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Zelensky admitted that he did not want to fulfill these agreements, and even he de facto admitted the same even before this. So this he just changed his policy in this regard, which was, I think, major policy failure because this could have prevented a war in Ukraine and Russian invasion, which has very negative consequences, devastating consequences to Ukraine. And in addition to this, actually, there were also statements by former German leader of Angela Merkel and a former French president. I think Francois Hollande and former president of Ukraine Poroshenko, they all said that when they signed agreement in Minsk for this resolution of this war, they basically did not want to implement such agreements. So this was a decision by the West, and not only by the Ukrainian government, but also by the West, not to implement these agreements, just to use the time to kind of to prepare for war with Russia. And I think this is a big tragedy for Ukraine because Minsk agreement could have been a way to resolve this conflict and to prevent and avoid this devastating war after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022.
كيدينا ايفان دكتور ايفان كاتشانوفسكي نك داكن لقد صون داكن اسلواي زيلينسكي توافرن اسلواي 2014 و19 شفتيين يلمند نوايا يمند يمثاول كيان مينسك وكني هذا المقلم في كديوي ثلويث نتسا ذموس ماشا ماشي ذي بضرا اغلفغي اناس وخدينا نشتكي لا شكي دي غادي صادن اللي حاله اذا لا كثر سيدي تدون دكتور كاتشانوفسكي ديني ذاك يوث نتالي تكنيكان ثلاثة كي امثاوان انك كي من التلويث يمكن كان عارف يبدا طراف كاع لو كان دانوس دغا مسهمن وكنا دفن امثاوي دي اسطنبول سللت نيطوكيين دي اسرائيليين مشى امثاويا كي يروح مكان يخسر شكون بوريس جونسون نعرف إني نخدم الفواياج نخدم بوريس جونسون غان كييف شكيت خسران ويفانا نزل ثاغو غينس وغاديني شو تخميم غاف بوريس أكي جونسون إكس خسران أنشتاكي عاثوس المشاكل يساد سلمنداذ الأمريكان أكتمورا الناتو لوطون Dr. Ivan Katchanovski, let us now look at the prospects for peace and some of the previous talk attempts. Just a few weeks after the start of the war, Ukraine and Russia were about to close an agreement in Istanbul thanks to the mediation of the Turks and Israelis. The agreement failed because of Boris trips, the well-known Boris Johnson trips to Kiev. What is your reading about this event? And then, in other terms, do you think that Boris Johnson acted alone or in concert with the USA and other NATO countries?
Yes, I think this is a very crucial event during this war. And I researched this issue very closely because of its importance. I think now this evidence beyond any dispute that Western countries, basically West, blocked this agreement, which was very close to being signed by Ukraine and Russia to end this war and to prevent further damage and devastating consequences to Ukraine and basically return other territory of Ukraine, which was occupied by Russia since the start of the war, under control of the Ukrainian government in exchange for Ukraine being a neutral country and promising to demilitarize, to have limited forces, but military forces, but also with provisions that Ukraine can join the European Union. And I propose similar plan again for prevent this war before Russian invasion of Ukraine and also after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I also propose this in Korean media, in CBC interview. But again, this peaceful agreement was not signed because of direct intervention and pressure from the West. Specifically, Ukrainian media reported initially that this was kind of because of tip by Boris Johnson in April of 2022, and that he told basically Zelensky to keep fighting with Putin and not to sign any peaceful agreement with Russia to end this war. And this was confirmed later by many sources, including former Israeli Prime Minister, former Chancellor of Germany, former, again, senior Ukrainian diplomat who actually, Charlie, who's now in the West, again, as a researcher in the West. It was also confirmed by head of Ukrainian delegation in peace talks, David Arachamia, who said that Boris Johnson basically came this visit and told Ukrainian delegation and Ukrainian government and Zelensky not to sign peaceful agreement and to continue fighting with Russia. And this was also confirmed by member of this Ukrainian delegation at peace talks in Istanbul, Alexei Arestovich, who was former advisor to Zelensky. So they all stated basically, and Putin also made similar statements. So all this evidence is kind of now beyond any dispute that there was such agreement. And agreement actually provided for, this was very crucial part of agreement, that Ukraine could have received already a very significant kind of benefit in addition to basic agreement for not to become a member of NATO, which was not very likely in the first place because of opposition from Russia. And also, this was also in exchange for being a neutral country, Ukraine could have received as a concession from Russia in terms of a Russian withdrawal from all territory of Ukraine which was occupied by Russia since Russian invasion. And this is actually was also very important because Russia, for this reason, withdrew their forces from Kyiv area, which was one of the areas of Russian invasion, initial Russian invasion of Ukraine near Kyiv. They basically came very close to Kyiv city. But I do not see any kind of evidence that Russia wanted actually to take this to basically by military force Kyiv city because size of Russian military forces was limited. So they withdrew basically from Kyiv area as a result of this peaceful agreement, which was kind of almost negotiated between Ukraine and Russian delegations, and Ukrainian delegations, according to testimony by Alexei Arestovich, former advisor to Zelensky, was very pleased with this agreement, and they even opened a bottle of champagne on their return. But this totally changed after basically Western countries decided to continue to fight Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. And this was not only a decision by Boris Johnson, who was one of the most vocal Western politicians trying to kind of use this conflict and war in Ukraine to advance the goal, geopolitical goal, to weaken Russia. And the same policy was used by Biden administration. So this is also, I think, very clear that this was not only British decision, but it was a decision by Biden, and it was supported also by France and Germany, according to testimony and interview by a former Israeli prime minister, and according to other sources. So in this case, I think Western countries, basically led by the United States, and also with direct participation of a British prime minister, and basically block a peaceful agreement and told Zelensky to continue fighting Russia, even so there is no real prospect for defeat of Russia. So I think this has had very negative consequences on Ukraine and Ukrainians because it was possible to end this war in Ukraine and to get again and being able to get back under control of Ukrainian government a very significant part of Ukraine, with the exception of Crimea, which was subject to be negotiated in the future in terms of the status, and with the exception of Donbas region, which was kind of recognized as independent by Russia, but not recognized by other countries. So I think this is lost opportunity, and this is, I think, what was turning point in this war, in this conflict, because now it became not only open conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but also between the West and Russia in this case as a proxy war. And the reason for this, that Zelensky agreed to this, as I mentioned already, is that Ukraine is basically client state of the United States. So Western government has a lot of involvement in key policy decisions, and West specifically told actually former president of Ukraine after Maidan not to resist Russian military Russian annexation of Crimea. So because they were afraid that there would be war between Russia and the West, between Ukraine and Russia, which can lead to conflict between the West and Russia, and which will be very dangerous. And for this reason, Obama administration did not want to kind of to have such a conflict, and they told basically former kind of leader of Ukraine at the time, then acting President Turchinov not to resist Russia, and for this reason Russia was able to occupy annex Crimea without any military casualties. Basically, there were I think 2 or 3 people killed during one event, but this was kind of annexation without any resistance. And for I think, but this is the state's power and influence of the West in terms of kind of making very significant policy decisions in Ukraine, and this was kind of supported by this kind of blocking of peaceful agreement. And for this reason, now Zelensky resists any peaceful deal, not only because this is his decision, but this is also a decision by the West to continue fighting and weaken Russia. And this was stated openly by head in April of 2022 that the goal of U.S. policy is to weaken Russia, which is now, I think, will be again failure because Russia became much stronger militarily, and Russia now can defeat the West in Ukraine, and not only defeat Ukraine but also the West, which would have also negative consequences not only to Ukraine but also to the West.
كتصنع سيوني دينا إيفان كاتشانوفسكي ماشي ديال تنسى ماشي كنا مشى تفطس الوقت لأن كان كيتو مثلا كان عطير زاني تخدم ألكسندر بوريس جونسون وقادي دي تواليتي كيسان كيسمي كذا كان تيجلان ذا نغلاف أمزوارون أقوار كي قعدان تقل داي دوكلان رويوم أوني زوج آلاف وتسعطاش على مع زوج آلاف اثنين وعشرين اللي روح يخمثير زاني ينس ثموث كييف يكسخصنيق أم ثوا إجلان يار روسيين لوكران ماشا إنك بروفيسور كاتشانوفسكي إنك إذا كان ماشي كان تساني تسبا تاسو تزفلت بايدن على ادمينستراسيون بايدن كانت موايش على فرنسا الألمان تكان كسخصا يكون وخيخا كيان إيران سلواي زيلينسكي دي ثوارتي دي جينا لا كثورات غا الشدة شكي دينا فانشتاكي فوس تسيدي تدون ذاك الخصاص نوزال نسلاحي تسعة وكنا تقابل داني تسعة داني كان يستخدم مشاطاس ما تولي ذا شعيد تسعة نوس داني تحصل شكون ثيمون مالو نا ويسترن كونتريز والسكنة شي سلاحني وكنا تخدم الجيران اعتراض ديال الروس هي ذا شكيك جان كيكين طغى كين غير الروس لوكران تروح مكان سلوكيا لا تروح كنا خمس انجليزيت بروكسي وور نا الجيران سلوكيا لا ميال الروس وكنا هذا الروس تضعف مليح تستخدم ناس تقدرش Ukraine. That's my next question. Dr. Katchanovski, Ukraine is currently in delicate situation with less ammunition and fewer soldiers. So could this be due to the fact that Western countries are not providing Ukraine with much needed weaponry and at the same time are not helping moving towards the peace agreement in other terms? Do you consider this war to be between Russia and Ukraine, or the West using Ukraine to fight a proxy war against Russia? That's my question.
Yes, I think Western support in terms of military support, but also financial and humanitarian support has a very important role in this war. And for this reason, I think this is the reason why Ukraine was not defeated by Russia sooner, because without Western aid, without military assistance, which was provided, Ukraine could not have resisted Russia for a very long time because of casualties, because of destruction of military equipment and weapons by Ukrainian forces. So now Ukraine received a lot of support from the West in terms of weapons like tanks, artillery, and artillery systems, multiple rocket launchers, drones, and intelligence data, and even advisors and special forces from the Western countries are deployed in Ukraine, and they are actively supporting Ukraine. So a lot of decisions actually by Ukrainian military, including Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv region and also counteroffensive in Kherson region, were supported and basically devised with Western military involvement of Western countries, NATO members, including the United States, United Kingdom, and the same applies to counteroffensive, which failed in this year in southern Ukraine to defeat Russia in southern Ukraine. And this was also kind of a direct involvement of the Western countries in planning this counteroffensive. But I can say, based on such involvement of the West, which is, I think, very important. So now we can say that this conflict in Ukraine is not only war between Russia and Ukraine, which is still, I think, very important characterization of this war, but it became also war between West and Russia, but not a conventional war, but a proxy war, because there is no direct Western involvement of Western military in fighting Russia. They are mostly doing this indirectly by means which I already mentioned. So we can call this conflict a proxy war, and the proxy war became very significant, and I think I can say that even more important compared to war between Russia and Ukraine after the Western countries blocked this peace deal in April of 2022. And I can say that there's still a dimension of civil war in Ukraine, which is still ongoing in Donbass, because this is, I think, never almost reported by the Western media, because Donbass is a Russian region, and it became, and it basically de facto seceded from Ukraine with Russian support in 2014, and I did a public opinion poll, and Donbass was the only region, with the exception of Crimea, in which there was majority support for different forms of separatism in Ukraine, including joining Russia or becoming autonomous or becoming independent from Ukraine. In all other regions, with the exception of Crimea, there was no such majority support. So there is a genuine kind of support for Russia in this region, and a lot of people who are actually former Ukrainian citizens or still Ukrainian citizens in Donbass are fighting for Russia in this region. So, and there are heavy casualties in Donbass among separatists, not only among Russian forces. So we still have combination of basically of war between Russia and Ukraine, proxy war between the West and Russia, and also civil war in Donbass, which became less significant but still important part of this conflict.
تنميرس نحكي سكيت سكيني ديس دونا شكون توجد نبغى نفرس ساكوني سنفهم وكاع ترى كي نوس لوكران هكذا الدكتور بروفيسور إيفان كاتشانوفسكي مسلير ثورا فين يشدن كي ثيمو كي نمالو رحنا مكان تسورون الناس نربح الجيران كي يمجال كي روس مشا ماشي داني اللوث ذا شكي هادي سكن دغا يوث مقارنة كني فيكتوريا نيولاند فوتا نيولاند نتاتيك تذبلت بايدن ثانات نتاتيك يتمسلين نغا ثانات فوقانو انت مسلا كي نقدرون كان دي لو كان سجل لا فوت 13 مشا تقرا كي من المكان بخمسه مغاصني زغين سكسنت سكون كانيس وين شدني في ترتيب من الامريكان يشدن غير لوكران ويفنن هذا تبغلين ايوا شو دي لا واش تكين نشكي جنس قصير بروفيسور كاتشانوفسكي سينير the west including west countries including Canada is very involved in this war and seems to have become a prisoner of its narrative of victory over Russia. My question, Doctor, would a defeat for Ukraine would also synonymous of a defeat of the Western countries because some are saying that Victoria Nuland is resigned recently. It is like an admission of the failure of the US policy toward Russia. What do you think about that? And what is your view about this point?
Yes, I think I also wrote in my book, which will be published soon, that and in my other publications and my papers presented in major academic conferences and my social media comments, that this is actually, I think this is a very important dimension of this conflict, and likely defeat of Ukraine by any accounts. This is like almost there is close to zero chance of Ukraine being able to defeat Russia unless there would be direct military intervention by the West and fighting, and NATO would start fighting Russia in Ukraine, which can lead to a nuclear war between again Russia and Western countries, which are nuclear powers like US, United Kingdom, and France. So I think this is for this reason it's not very likely to happen. On again, close to zero chance of this happening, but still can be significant. So in this case, Ukraine chance of defeating Russia is basically close to zero. And in such case, defeat of Russia would become also defeat of the West. And this is, I think, very clear. And this would have also major negative effect, not only on Ukraine, but also on the West in terms of international area. And it could also have effect on world order, specifically because of countries in the global south or countries outside of the West might try to change their orientation and become more independent from the Western countries and United States leadership, and basically United States world order system would collapse, and there would be multipolar system with countries like Russia and China becoming basically more significant global powers and central of power in world order. And I think this is, real possibility. And I think a resignation of Victoria Nuland, who was one of the chief U.S. officials responsible for Ukraine policy, even beginning from Maidan, I think maybe maybe not just for the reasons that this is a kind of change of the policy or admission of such defeat of this policy. This may be for other reasons, because I do not see now open admission by other leading members of Biden administration or other Western governments that this was actually failed policy and it needs to be replaced with a peaceful agreement. There is still continuation of the same policy, and Biden still tried to send military support to Ukraine, and the other Western countries, including France and Germany, also still want to fund this war. They provide military funding, they provide weapons to Ukraine, but again, this is not likely to change the outcome of this war. So I think this is very clear that the effect of this war would be not only a kind of a negative effect on Ukraine, but also on the West, because this will be basically de facto defeat of the West. The only question is how much defeat it would be, because it's possible to make it partial defeat and avoid even more significant consequences in the case when Ukrainian forces would collapse, because there would be no kind of possibility to resist Russia because of destruction of weapons or lack of weapons, and because of lack of military personnel. So in such case, consequences even would be more catastrophic. This would be a full defeat of Ukraine, but I do not expect that this is this would lead to occupation of entire Ukraine. But I think Russia could take control over other parts of Ukraine as a result of this.
Dr. Ivan Katchanovski, only a few questions remaining. We want to take this opportunity of having you as a guest to have a complete picture about what is happening on Ukraine and around it, of course. And my next question, I will say it first in Kabyle language. ويفنن نظر ثمورليا نون كينا كنظر كيضرون كادي الأوكران وين كيضرون كادي غزة l'Israël Palestine متولي ما كنفروا حك نقارن فرانسيس دو بوا دو ميزور طاس كي مثلا دي غازا وعاود ولاش امس لاي فلاس ماشا كي نولا لوكران يعني دروس بوين كني ديال الخساره ان غازا ولا ممكن كيوك تيمورا نومالو زين فلاس كي تمسلاين فاش كي كان اذا شكي هاث نغانزا تمولي نلقى كينا دكتور Katchanovski, when considering the two ongoing wars in Ukraine and Gaza, what strikes the mind of a neutral observer like us is the very high number of civilian casualties in Gaza as compared to the civilian casualties in Ukraine. My question is, are there reasons for this? In other terms, is such a comparison valid or not?
Yes, I think this is valid to compare conflict in Ukraine with other conflicts, and I did this also for my research. And I teach actually at the University of Ottawa, I teach courses in comparative conflicts in which I look into wars in different countries, including countries in the Middle East, like Syria war, Iraq war, or war in Afghanistan, or wars in Africa, in Sudan, war in Zaire, again, and conflicts in Latin America. So I do this professionally, and comparative research I think very useful. And for this reason, I think it's very obvious now that casualties, civilian casualties in Ukraine, are relatively much lower compared to many other wars taking place recently, especially war in Gaza. Um, and I think in terms of United Nations official documentation of casualties in Ukraine, they estimate that there are about 10,000 or slightly more than 10,000 confirmed casualties of this war in Ukraine, including both on Ukrainian government-controlled territory, which would be an absolute majority of civilian casualties, but also about 20 or 25%, as far as I remember, on territory which is occupied by Russia or controlled by Russia and separatists in Donbass. So in terms of casualties, I think this is one of the civilian casualties. This is actually one of the lowest casualties, civilian casualties ratio to military casualties, compared to major conflicts, especially this war in Gaza, which has coincided with war in Ukraine. And there were claims by Russian government to justify invasion of Ukraine that there was genocide taking place in Ukraine against Russian speakers in Ukraine or Russians, specifically during civil war in Donbass. And after Russian invasion, there were also claims by Ukrainian government, which were supported by many Western governments, that there was a genocide of Ukrainians by Russian forces in Ukraine. And I can say, based on my research and based on evidence, which was recently confirmed by United Nations, there is no evidence of genocide either by Ukrainian forces or by Russian forces in Ukraine, and this is demonstrated by civilian casualties, which are, I think, relatively low, but still very significant in terms of like a human dimension. My friend of mine, actually, who was living in Mariupol, who is originally from Western Ukraine with his family. So I lost contact with him just after the war. So I do not know what happened to him. And again, we used to communicate very often, but I do not see any contact and no information about him. What happened? I think this was actually major city which suffered a lot of civilian casualties in Mariupol, but. But in terms of statistics and in terms of dimension, from a comparative perspective, this is not a genocide in Ukraine, and I think this is very important. There were obviously also war crimes taking place, specifically killing of civilians by an execution of prisoners of war and members of Ukrainian territorial defense by Russian forces in Bucha, but they were inflated in terms of number of casualties. There were no like hundreds of casualties who were executed by Russians, but a few dozens number of casualties who were confirmed by United Nations, and the same applies to United Nations. So United Nations did not find any evidence of genocide. So this is based on my research, and I think this is very important dimension as well.
كاين كاين وكذا نادي خدمه كاع كي حريشن ونادي خدمه الى منقار comparative politics لا بوليتيك كومباري تمقول لك كي شوف يضرون نيكو دي ديال ثما ذو مظال يسير سينك بالي ماشي اكن ايميدياتن كي كاين تمو كاينو مالو هضرون دا في مساتي يضرون كذا لوكران ذروس ماشي مثين استمسلاين فين كيضرون دي غازا دي اسرائيل دي بالستين هاث كنيون سغزيبا في السنة مشوار تصن شكون عطل قيمة كالكري سقسيين أو يفن أثوي غادو نغلن ما ذلو كران ذروس ذا كان ثلاث تقدير زغام ذا كان كوناس يا كان ثورا كان دنوس يلو كران سناث نطمناضين نان تقدو ذا لان دي دونباز مشا كي لد تقدير وكني عاد زمان هذا وين هذا متقان النظام ناغا تمنظ النظام لدغا غيوانين تمقانين يشبان خاركيف اوديسا ويفان نظر ثمولين سميلان زمان دي ضمون شتاكين Dr. Katchanovski, in view of all the ongoing military operations in Ukraine, some say that Russia is en route of claiming for more Russian-speaking oblasts, including the two major cities of Kharkiv and Odessa. My question is: this scenario can happen? Is it possible for that?
I think this is would depend on the outcome of this war and how it will continue, and how it would end. So there's a real possibility that Russia would try to expand their control over territory, which they managed to occupy or next already, beyond current borders or current territories. And I think cities like Kharkiv city and Odessa city are the ones which are in most danger of this because they are um, kind of close to the current area of conflict and area of the war. And Putin recently, for instance, promised that he would, or said that he would consider having sanitary zone between or near the border between Russia and Ukraine. And this would likely or possibly would include Kharkiv, which is very close, city of Kharkiv, which is very close to border between Russia and Ukraine, and also was a major area in which Ukrainian forces recently using also Russian volunteers from neo-Nazi organization and military information, which is supported by Ukrainian forces and military intelligence. They tried to launch raids in territory of Russia, and they shell Russian city of Belgorod and cities of Bryansk and so on. And for this kind of so in this case, I think there is a real danger that Russia would try to occupy these cities as well, but it's not clear yet if this is going to happen and if a peaceful agreement would be signed sooner. So it might not be the case, but if the war would continue, this becomes a real danger and real possibility because the front might collapse and Ukraine will not be able to defeat these cities if in such a case. And all of them are actually very important. Also, just Twitter. Elon Musk tweeted, I think yesterday, that this is likely, this is possibility which can happen if war would continue. And I agree with him on this regard based on my research.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question is regarding the current situation. I'm wondering if Ukraine consider backtracking its possible membership to NATO to exchange of security guarantees, even with the possibility of losing some territories. If I may translate this question to my language. أو يفننظر تمغلير نفكاكينا لكن هو سنعت ميلا أو خار نتموت اليوكران كنت تليرا تعقلت الناتو ميلا غنشكي دياوير تغلس نار لا سيكوريتي غاس ميلا تصروح هكاكي كرا مذكرني نار نتمناضين. I don't know if you understand my question.
Yes, I understand. So I think in this case, I think these possibilities that this could be part of peace deal between Russia and Ukraine to end this war, because neutrality of Ukraine and no NATO membership of Ukraine is a major demand by Russia from the start. And this was also part of initial agreement, which was very close to being signed between Russia and Ukraine in April of 2022. So I think this is very likely would be outcome of this war if there would be peace agreement. But currently, Zelensky and Western governments do not want to do this, so they reject any compromise with Russia, and Russia also do not want to have any kind of ceasefire right now, which would lead to kind of freezing current conflict because Russia has military advantage. So this is, I think, possibility that if peace deal will be signed, there will be neutrality of Ukraine as condition for kind of for ending this war. But again, this is not yet certain, and I think this might depend on the outcome of this war in terms of military outcome, but also in terms of political outcome. If Zelensky, for instance, would be replaced as leader of Ukraine, the new leader of Ukraine might be more willing to have peaceful agreement in contrast to Zelensky, who promised again to continue fighting Russia and defeat Russia, which is not likely. And also, if there will be change in the U.S. government, like if Donald Trump would be elected, this can lead to kind of peace deal signed between Russia and Ukraine, including this neutrality agreement, which is I think would be a real kind of part of a peace deal because this is I think a very important demand from Russia. And even so, again, the issue is kind of if if Western countries would agree to this, and if Russia would be satisfied with such a neutrality now, or if Russia would demand more territory or more kind of more demands, like including, for instance, replacement of Ukrainian government from a pro-Western into pro-Russian government, or Russia would demand also that Ukraine would not join not only NATO but also would not join European Union, which was possibility of which was agreed that Ukraine can join European Union in original agreement between Russia and Ukraine, which was adopted in 2 years ago.
ويفانتو اسقسي قبل نقالو تداوي غافين يشد كيكير في أفوس نتالتي تساكن كيكير ثيمورا كيكير زاخل تمورا كيان مالو نوست إلو كان مشاو نوليرش تكير فغان تمورا يكير وسنا هاث ذا شون سبا بونش تكير وكذا سقسيو دكتور كاتشانوسكي could we say that Ukraine does not have much solidarity outside from the West? The reason why I am asking this question, it seems that the other countries are either neutral or do support Russia. Does this mean that the Western countries have never been so unified on the inside? Why don't the countries of the South support, for example, Ukraine? Is this division different from that we used to see during the Cold War?
Yes, I think to important extent this is yes, because in the current conflict, countries like China basically is officially neutral country, but it is more pro-Russian in terms of its position. And countries like India is more neutral country, and many countries in other countries in the global south, including Latin American countries and African or Middle Eastern countries, are either neutral or some of them support Russia in this conflict, but some of them also support Ukraine in the West. So this kind of, for instance, countries like North Korea and Cuba and Syria, and Iran, they support Russia in this conflict and even supply weapons like drones from Iran or missiles from and artillery supplies from North Korea, but also like countries, some countries like China and India and Turkey, they which are neutral in this kind of or support Russia, like or de facto support Russia, but without military support, like in case of China. They also became major trade partners for Russia, so they were able to get a lot of Russian energy supplies, like oil and natural gas, in case of China and India and other countries. So they basically enable Russia to continue this war. And this is, I think, also a very important dimension of this conflict. But there are also countries like Argentina and the new government, which openly supported the Ukrainian government, and some countries, other like countries in the global south, which also support Ukrainian government. But a majority of the global south does not openly support Ukraine in this conflict, and but also they do not support Russia openly, even so they become neutral in this case, or some kind of some. But I think in terms of global significance, countries like China and India have much greater impact in the global relations compared to many other countries like Argentina, which support Ukraine in this case.
My last question, سيوان قالوا دكتور ذاك النهار دويفن ذا سقسي شو دنا غير 3 سنين نغ لومانيتي ديني هاثي وشولين كي كيتمساين ثيروسي ديال الأوكران تيديرن يوث تسواثو قسيحت مليح مليح ويفن نظر ذا شو إذا زكانسن أمتي تولي غازكانسن وهاث ما إلا يساغي كان يمديا يكسنك كاحني ديني Doctor, my last question is related to the human, is at the human level of the nation. Speaking Ukrainian families, how do they cope with this tragedy, which for them is probably a double drama? Do you know of any cases that illustrate your points?
I think in the issue of Russian speakers, I think there's a division between ethnic Russians and ethnic Ukrainians who speak Russian. Both of them speak a Russian language as a main language, but there is majority support for Russia in this war from Donbass and from Crimea, which is again regions which are ethnically Russian, like in case of Crimea, or half of population are ethnic Russian in case of Donbass. But in other regions of Ukraine, which are including the ones which are next by Russia, like Kherson region and Zaporizhia region and other regions which are under control of Ukrainian government, like Kharkiv region and Odessa region, even so they are majority Russian speaking, they do not support Russia in this conflict. So I think kind of, and in terms of impact, there is obviously human impact in these cases, but because a lot of kind of casualties in this war actually include Russian-speaking Ukrainians from these regions. Even so, they do not support Russia. I think they also might not be supporting kind of policies of Zelensky in terms of kind of rejecting peace deal and other policies in terms of limiting Russian language in Ukraine. But I'm originally from Western Ukraine, which is, I think, most anti-Russian region, most anti-Russian part of Ukraine, and most nationalistic and pro-Western part of Ukraine. But I can say also on human level, this is a kind of there is no kind of unanimous support for the current war in this region because I speak to my relatives, I speak to kind of people who live in Western Ukraine, whom I know for a very long time, and they kind of they also many of them support peace in peaceful resolution of this conflict, and I can say also on my personal level, my relatives, one kind of distant relatives, one was killed, and one is badly wounded in fighting in this war. So kind of and many were drafted and now serving in this war. But I think this is big tragedy for Ukraine because casualties would be having a very significant impact for a very long time, and this would include not only Eastern Ukraine but also Western Ukraine in this case, and any kind of outcome of this war would be kind of if it would continue, more casualties would be because now this kind of I think very difficult situation because this would have major negative impact on the human level after the war would end because of many people who are not only killed but wounded, badly wounded. So and many people actually who left Ukraine already, including from regions in Eastern Ukraine, including Russian-speaking regions. So now I think after the end of this war, the big issue would become human toll on this war and how it could have been avoided and prevented, and also how we can kind of deal with this war after the end of this war. I think this would be also important questions to ask why this war happened and why it was continuing for such long and why it could not have been prevented or ended sooner and all these casualties could have been avoided. I think a lot of Ukrainians, specifically in the eastern Ukraine, would central and southern Ukraine, but also many in the western Ukraine would ask questions from the Zelensky government why this policy was kind of adopted and why Western countries supported such a policy of a proxy war in Ukraine without any real possibility of victory of Ukraine. So I think this will be a lot of tough questions to be asked and a lot of kind of discussions and a lot of human toll would become obvious and significant issue after the end of this war.
Dr. Katchanovski, I wish if I can ask you maybe some minor questions related to the events happening in the world. There are miscellaneous questions. If you can just answer quickly, is it possible? You
Yes.
accept that? Okay, just my first question is related to the Putin's re-election impact on the future. Will he go back to the original plan to seize Kiev as he tried to when the war started in February 2020, 2022, sorry.
Yes, I can say based on my research and based on a lot of evidence, there was no original plan by Putin to seize Kiev or other major Ukrainian cities. I think the original goal of Russian invasion, based on limited size of Russian military force and based on what they did with withdrawal from these forces from Kiev area after peace deal was almost signed. So in such case, I think Russian goal was either to have a regime change in Ukraine from pro-Western into pro-Russian one, or force peace deal between Russia and Ukraine on Russian demands, on Russian kind of on Russian demands of neutrality and so on, which is, I think was such a goal. And I do not see that such a real possibility that Russia would try to take control over Kiev because it will be very difficult military, but also there will be strong opposition in Kiev and in Western Ukraine. So I do not expect this to happen.
Okay, from Russia to United States of America, upcoming U.S. presidential election made U.S. policy divisions, Doctor, Democrats versus Republicans. Maybe some words about this, Doctor?
Yes, I think this is now an important political issue because of a division between Republicans, who are led by Donald Trump, and Democrats, who are led by Biden. And I think there is a real issue in terms of now approving media support for Ukraine, which is now stalled in the Congress, in the House of Representatives, which are controlled by Republicans. And Donald Trump promised to end this war very soon after he would be elected as president. So if this would happen, I think there is a real possibility that this war might be might end sooner compared to a situation when Biden will continue to be president of United States. In such case, war would last for a long time and would still have a negative impact on Ukraine. But again, it would be very difficult to predict because actually election promises can often be kind of repudiated, and this happened also previously. And Donald Trump again, kind of even if he would be elected, he might be under pressure to continue this war. So it's still very tough to say. But political division in the United States, I think, very important in terms of having impact on this war, and it can also have impact in the future.
What about President Emmanuel Macron of France? It seems that his tone to have changed from the negotiator with Vladimir Putin, to a most aggressive suggestion of possibly sending troops to Ukraine. What do you think, Doctor?
I think this was a very significant statement by Macron, who suggested to send French forces to Ukraine during this war, because this would lead to escalation of this conflict and even possibility of war between NATO and Russia, which are nuclear powers, including France, which is major nuclear power. So in this case, I don't expect this is likely to happen, or this would happen to a significant extent, because there are already some limited special forces present in Ukraine and military instructions in Ukraine from different countries of the West. But I think I think it's also kind of a revelation that France become basically a follower of the United States in this conflict, and that there was no independent kind of effort by French government to try to have peaceful negotiations between Ukraine and Russia to end this war, as France was very active, for instance, in negotiating end of war between Russia and Georgia in 2018. But basically, France now follows U.S. policy, with the exception of this latest statement, which was not reported by United States, to send NATO forces to Ukraine. So I think in this case, I think it's kind of very revealing also that basically France become this the policy of France in this case is I think also kind of very important and very significant in terms of the conflict, because it just followed NATO countries and other countries like United States without doing independent kind of policy, which was more significant kind of in the past of France. But now with latest statement, I think this was mostly for political reasons by French president, just and not for a real possibility, because this will be very dangerous and very significant consequences, including possibility of war between NATO and Russia. And for Western countries, this is not acceptable, including like specifically for the United States, and even many people in France do not support this.
Germany and England, they are of great importance as well. I'm wondering what are their contribution to the conflict, Doctor?
Sorry, can you repeat this question?
I mean about Germany and England. I'm wondering what are their contribution to the conflict?
I think again, Germany. This is a similar situation, because Germany kind of was kind of involved in Minsk agreements, trying to resolve this conflict in Ukraine. But after Russian invasion, it also basically followed the United States lead in this war and supported a proxy war in Ukraine. And even after there was Nord Stream pipelines, gas pipelines were blown up, with likely involvement of United States and reported involvement also of Ukrainian special forces. So Germany just follows United States policy even more closely and more kind of how should I say, without any dissent than France did and many other Western countries. But England also is following, and Great Britain basically also following United States lead, in this case, U.S. policy of Biden administration, and it became very active in supporting proxy war, as was demonstrated by visit from Boris Johnson and his message to Zelensky to fight Russia, to kind of continue fighting Russia and not to sign peace deal. And so this is like just continuation of this policy. So in this case now, basically major countries like of European Union, like and former member of European Union like United Kingdom, they became united in this policy of supporting the war in Ukraine and not kind of trying to achieve peaceful end of this war, and basically following United States lead in this conflict, with some exceptions which are actually on the side of more aggressive policy, even compared to the United States, without any possibility of success. So in this case, I think defeat of Ukraine and defeat of in this war would be also defeat not only the United States, but also would have very negative impact on France and countries like Germany and United Kingdom. And this is already can be witnessed in Africa, like countries in like Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso and recently Senegal, former French colonies. They became kind of now more kind of to various extent kind of opposing France, French presence in this region, and some of them trying to kind of have close relations with Russia, which is I think having big impact on this region as well, and in terms of the influence of France, which is kind of goes back to colonial times when France controlled this region. So I think would have even more significant effect after the end of this conflict, and many other countries might try to realign and change their foreign policy and foreign orientation after the war would end with, again, which is likely would end with the defeat of Ukraine, which is, I think, would have been prevented and avoided, but unfortunately is most likely to happen, and this would have impact on these countries as well, and many other countries in the Middle East and countries, again, in Latin America, maybe to a lesser extent, but countries in Asia, South Asia would be also affected by this.
That's really, Doctor, my last question regarding to North European countries, Finland and Sweden. We all know that in the beginning of this month that Sweden became a member of NATO, and it was almost 1 year after Finland joined the NATO. My question regarding those two countries: what do you think about such direct impact on of the war?
I think this membership of Finland and Sweden would not have a major effect on this war because in Ukraine because they are not major military powers. So these countries are relatively have small military, so they would not have major impact on the outcome of this war. And they supported Ukraine even before they joined NATO in terms of military supplies and economic support. So I think this is a more political move and just demonstrations that kind of that the Western countries are more united in this policy, and even kind of formerly neutral countries would try to join NATO. But I think this is also very revealing that these countries were able to join NATO so fast, while Ukrainian kind of promise of becoming a NATO member was first made in Bucharest, in Romania, in 2008, when NATO countries basically promised that Ukraine and Georgia would become members of NATO in the future. And this was kind of promise which was issued after kind of after decision or as a result of decision by United States, but still, even since 2008, there is no real prospect of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO in contrast to these countries. So this is just an illustration that I think NATO membership was just important factor in this war and the Russian invasion of Ukraine without any real prospect of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO in contrast to countries like Sweden and Finland, which would have no similar effect on this war or even a conflict with Russia because they are not as big military powers, they are not as important as in contrast to Ukraine, which is, I think, now center of this conflict and would decide this outcome of this conflict. And Sweden and Finland would remain on periphery. Even so, this is an important issue in terms of their relations with the West. But again, for Ukraine, this is not a major kind of deal breaker in the case of this war in Ukraine, which is, I think, would be still there is still a very decisive advantage of Russia. And I think prospects of Ukraine in this conflict, in this war, are very kind of pessimistic from my perspective as a researcher of this conflicts and also as a Ukrainian myself.
Dr. Katchanovski, thank you for being my guest for this long interview and to be being patient for answering my 20 questions regarding the Ukraine and Russia conflict.
Yes, thank you. I think this was a very good question, so it was a pleasure to answer them.
Merci Nguyen, très ministre, voilà, the professor Damas Dawan. نوين منقى ثسنا تمتي تسرثيث ذي سداويث أوتاوا ذوين يقدشن يوقف ثلوفا يشدن أغام ثلوفا ذي من غاندي الدونيث مضى لدغا وين اللي كان عندنا مشاوها يتمثلين غف تمثال يضغون أما ذي كندا أما ذي الأمريكان مازال عاد النغال غورس ما إلا وانا ديانون سياغ ذات سياغ ذينا ودينيغ قيمة ذي ثلويث